In 1960, 63% of those eligible voted for president, ultimately electing John Fitzgerald Kennedy. That was the highest voter turnout in a presidential election in modern history. In a country where voting is so vital, millions of eligible voters take their right to vote for granted. Modern media loves to paint a picture of faceless, unknown civilians losing their voice in other countries. However, this often leads to our society forgetting about their own neighbors and colleagues that are at risk of having their voting rights ripped away from them over something as trivial as a stolen watch. These people would give anything to get their voting rights back. All 5 million of them.
Take 'em away, take 'em away, Lord. Take away these chains from me.
I think there's sometimes this perception that individuals don't care about voting. That is not the case. One of the first things that somebody asks us as we're helping them expunge their record and remove court costs is, "Can I get my voting rights back? Is that possible?" And so it really is something that can make a huge difference in somebody's life. Felony disenfranchisement is a big word for saying that a conviction triggers your loss of your right to vote. For a democracy like ours, it's a really serious thing to say that somebody, because of one act that they've committed that resulted in a felony. Sometimes these felonies don't even result in a sentence, any time incarcerated, but that one conviction triggers the loss of their voting rights. And in some states, that could be forever. And for some crimes, that could be forever, or it could be for a certain amount of time, or it could be until the person, like in Tennessee, does something to get them back. Tennessee's law is one of the worst because I like to think of it as two reasons. One, because it requires the individual to do something. So it's not automatic. Many other states, as soon as you are released and complete your sentence, you are able to get back on the voting rolls by just doing what everybody else does to register to vote, by filling out a voter registration form. That's not the case in Tennessee. The other piece of it is that you don't automatically get restored no matter what type of offense you have. And so there are still some felonies in Tennessee where you lose your right to vote forever. And that's not the case in other states. I'm Joy Radice. I go by the pronouns she, her, hers, and I'm the director of the UT Legal Clinic. My areas of research are on issues of reentry for people with criminal convictions. And so I study laws that offer relief to people throughout the country when they have a conviction and obstacles have been put in their way for employment, housing, and things like voting rights.
My heart is broken 'cause my spirit's not free. Lord, take away these chains from me.
When someone is arrested, you don't go to I just got arrested school, right? So you're thrown into the system and you don't know what to expect. You're scared. And a lot of times that's what leads to plea deals because they're in this isolated system by themselves without support, without that knowledge. My brother actually got sentenced with a felony, did 8 years, and came home on 20 years of paper for drugs. No one was harmed, no violent crime. It was just drugs. And that means he was a member of society, working, paying taxes for 20 years, but on probation and was not allowed to get his voting rights back for 20 years. This happens all over the state. Just because someone is not in prison does not mean they get their voting rights back. You could be a normal functioning person in society, but you will not be able to have your voice heard. My name is Imani Infalme, she, her pronouns. I am a national participatory defense trainer, organizer, and staff for Debug Silicon Valley, based in San Jose, California. I live in Knoxville, Tennessee, where I'm the co-founder of Community Defense of East Tennessee, where we do primarily participatory defense, which is fighting mass incarceration. And that work does lead us into getting information for people to restore their rights and seeing how people are being disenfranchised through the court system.
Take 'em away, Lord. Take away these chains from me. My heart is broken 'cause my spirit's not free.
Disenfranchisement refers to a specific legal procedure that strips those civil rights, and it comes up anytime you try to exercise one of those rights and a background check reveals that you have the felony on your record. Tennessee is one of a handful of states, mainly in the Southeast, that permanently disqualify you from voting if you've ever had a felony. There's a small number of states that still permanently disqualify, and at least two of them, Virginia and Kentucky, just in the past 2 to 5 years, have abolished that rule and started restoring rights as soon as sentences are served. I think the mainstream United States position would be to just automatically restore voting rights after someone has served their sentence. And I think that's sort of a reasonable middle ground that Tennessee should adopt, similar to Kentucky and Virginia, who used to have permanent disenfranchisement the way we do, and just in the past couple of years have started restoring voting rights as soon as a sentence is served. So if Kentucky and Virginia can do it, I think Tennessee can too. My name is Chris Martin. My pronouns are he and him, or they and them. My job title is Assistant Public Defender for the Knox County District Public Defender's Office. And my work involves felony disenfranchisement in that mainly I represent a lot of indigent criminal defendants who are accused of felonies. And I also represent clients who already have felonies on their record. I assist them in getting their voting rights restored and some other remedies available for people with felony convictions. Tennessee and several other southern states have a sort of Civil War Jim Crow legacy of removing voting rights from people who have a felony conviction. And this does date all the way back to the end of the Civil War and the abolition of slavery, when post-Confederate states were still looking for a way to criminalize former slaves.
Every year I just keep getting deeper in debt. If there's a happy day, Lord, I haven't seen one yet.
In Tennessee and in several other states, if you get a felony conviction, you lose a number of civil rights. You're not considered a citizen anymore for the purposes of Tennessee law. In this state, you lose the right to vote. That's the main one. You lose the right to serve on a jury. You lose the right to run for public office. And you lose the right to serve as executor of an estate or as a guardian for a minor. So there's a lot of important civil rights that get taken away that affect what powers and abilities you have as a citizen if you get a felony conviction. And the most controversial is probably the loss of the right to vote.
People also lose their ability to apply for public housing with certain convictions. Sometimes they lose their ability with certain drug convictions to apply for student loans so that they can go to college after their sentence is complete. They often lose their rights to certain government benefits that help sustain them as they're getting themselves back on their feet after they've been incarcerated or punished for a crime. And so the US in general is just dramatically more punitive on the criminal side, and then also in thinking about the thousands and thousands of laws we've created that create obstacles that are triggered by a conviction that are civil obstacles that aren't even part of the criminal system.
Land that I love is the land that I'm working, but it's hard to love it all the time when your back is a hurt. Getting too old now to push this here plow. Please let me lay down so I can look at the clouds.
It not only is discriminatory in that it discriminates against people who've had a point in their life, and I have so many clients where the convictions on their record are not half the story of the individuals that they are. They're low points in their lives. They're points in their lives that they wish they could move past. And felony disenfranchisement is just one way that it's a constant reminder of that really bad period, and in a way that they can't move past that one thing that happened to them or that they caused because of a really difficult situation. There's a scarier discriminatory impact because we have so many individuals who are people of color, who are the people in our criminal legal system, who are the people who have convictions. And so when you look at the data is crystal clear that a disproportionate number of people of color, both African Americans and Latinos, are individuals who we charge with crimes, who we convict with crimes, who we incarcerate. And so once you realize that those are the individuals with felony convictions, then you can't help but see that it also is discriminatory when we say that a felony is the thing that's going to keep you from voting.
Policing and prosecution in poor communities looks like predator versus prey. It's a system fueled off of money, and anything where the motivation is profit ends up being corruption. If you live on the east side of Knoxville versus Farragut area, Hardin Valley area, you're 20 times more likely to be pulled over. That's 20 times more opportunities for someone to be taken away from their family member, put in jail, and have to sit there because 90% of that community cannot even afford bail to get out, to try to go to work tomorrow, to go pay a court cost they're going to have to pay in the future.
About 170,000 African American people, or about 1 in 5 of the Black population in Tennessee, are disqualified from voting because of felony convictions.
Take 'em away, Lord. Take away these chains from me. My heart is broken 'cause my spirit's not free. Lord, take away these chains from me.
Voting is not a right. Voting has never been a right, because a right is something that you cannot lose. Voting is a privilege. One wrong move and that privilege can be taken away in a heartbeat, leaving you to sit in a prison cell without any say in what happens to you. You may be awarded a second chance if you are charged in a state that lets you restore your voting rights after you've served your sentence. In Tennessee, you don't get that second chance unless you have enough money to be able to pay a lawyer to plead your case in front of a judge who works in a system that will attempt to keep you from regaining your rights. Unfortunately, the price of being considered for voter restoration is likely high enough to sap your accounts, leaving you unable to afford a lawyer. Not to mention the rate of recidivism in Tennessee, where there's a 47% chance that you will be reincarcerated just 3 years after you're released. The point is, if you do one thing wrong and you don't have enough money, you are most likely going to be stuck in the system for the rest of your life. You will never be able to vote, likely being put back in prison repeatedly while drowning in debt. It's only worse for people of color. 3 in 10 black men will be disenfranchised in their lifetime. And the extreme over-policing in communities of color and the lack of racial bias training means that people of color have a higher chance of getting arrested and convicted.
Take 'em away, Lord. Take away these chains from me. My heart is broken 'cause my spirit's not free. Lord, take away these chains from me.
Some of the DA's budgets are not fully funded, and how they make up the rest of that money is with fines and fees. Corruption. They're motivated to pull people over. They're motivated to get those fines and fees so they can get a paycheck.
The court costs that attach to a felony criminal case can usually be over $1,000, depending on how much time you spend in jail, how many court dates are required. It may be as high as $5,000 or $10,000. That also varies based on the severity of the offense. So before you can even go through what limited steps are available to get your rights back, you usually have to pay those costs off first.
Every single time there's a court appearance, every single time a subpoena goes out, an officer has to be called in to testify. Each day that you spend in jail, you're charged for every little piece of that in Tennessee. So I wanted to point out that in Tennessee, we have huge court costs that relate to individuals' cases that are extremely onerous and that exist when they finish their sentence. And so oftentimes people will finish their sentence with thousands of dollars that they owe to the court system that is part of a burden that they have to face as they're trying to figure out what to do when they're released from prison or jail or while they're on probation.
Across the state, you have people who just get a speeding ticket that could end up costing them to get their license suspended. And if they get pulled over again, you could possibly be put in jail about that. And you'll have those court fees that you have to somehow try to pay. And you don't. We're in poverty. You cannot pay that. So you're disenfranchised and you just don't have the capability of paying it. Specifically in Knoxville, let's say, for instance, you have 42% of the Black population that lives in poverty. So if you're living in poverty, you're definitely not going to have an opportunity to pay off any court fees. So that is going to linger.
You may think that this doesn't affect you, and even if you were arrested, you could pay bail and have a much better chance of avoiding a conviction. But that's not true for everyone. It is likely that every one of you has a close friend or relative that is disenfranchised. 1 in 12 people in Tennessee are disenfranchised, so it is a personal issue. You may not realize it, but it does affect you, or at least, it will.
Everyone always asks, how can they help? And I think it's such a complex answer. There's so many avenues you can help. Felony disenfranchisement, for one, it is about money. So donating. There are people who are sitting in jail. You can definitely reach out to our organization and we can find those people. There are other organizations in Knoxville who pay bail. So donating to the organizations, donating to people's bail, also educating people and advocating for people. It needs to come not from just people who look like me, because a lot of times we're overlooked. We need help uplifting our voices. If you have an audience and you uplift our voice and say, look, you need to pay attention to this issue. It may not be your personal issue, but it could be, and you should pay attention to that. And getting involved, when you see an organization that's doing work, reach out to them, ask them, what can you do? What do they have for you to do? It may not be something immediately, but just let them know that you're there and you're able and you're willing to help. Tell people, you know what? Don't skip jury duty. Actually show up. Try to do your civic duty, because you could be that one person that could change someone's life.
This is not an issue that will be fixed overnight. Felony disenfranchisement has been going on for centuries, to the point that it's tangled in the deepest roots of our legal system. It will take years of education and reform to be able to pull back from this overwhelming amount of voter suppression. One of the biggest traps within the system is bail. If you aren't able to pay bail, the price of waiting in jail for a court date will be too much for you to pay, leaving you with little to no money to pay a lawyer. That means you end up with an underpaid public defender who gets around 240 cases a year. For comparison, the American Bar Association sets their recommended maximum amount of cases a year to 150 felony cases or 400 misdemeanor cases. Even if they're a great lawyer, they don't have the time or resources to give you the defense you deserve. And you being in jail because you can't pay bail means that you can't help with that defense. The whole justice system is a failure to the disenfranchised, and while it will take years to fix the system itself, there are some things everyday people can do to help. If you have any spare money, please donate it to a bail fund. The best and most effective thing you can do is to spread awareness and make sure that no one is blissfully unaware of this issue. Support legislative reform that stops felony disenfranchisement, and call your representatives.
In Spain, you can't even look up somebody's criminal history. That would be crazy to somebody in the United States. We have publicized criminal histories in a way that countries around the world have not. I think everybody deserves a second chance. I think that once you create an obstacle, you are contributing to the potential of recidivism, that somebody will have nowhere to turn but additional criminal activity, and so they'll end up back in the system. And so the only way we can truly help individuals who find themselves in the criminal legal system is to really help them rebuild their lives once they're finished with their punishment. And part of that is encouraging them and engaging them in being active citizens, and voting is one of the ways to do that.
Do you really want to live in a society where people who have already paid their debt are still treated as non-citizens?